John, I'm curious if you could share your reflections. We've learned more as we go. Given your background in intelligence, you're the type of person that would often caution us when we see one clip or one video or one data point in a breaking emergency. We don't have the full story. We're a week and a half out. We still don't have it all, but boy, does it look even worse than it did Wednesday. Your reflections on what occurred and the responsibility of Donald Trump, someone that you did sound an alarm about early on?
Well, clearly it was a disaster last Wednesday in terms of the security breakdown. And all of the warning signs were there, strategic warning signs as well as tactical intelligence that clearly was available, as we are reading now in various press reports. And so I'm puzzled as to why things were not better done in terms of preparations. I think that there was probably a conscious decision at some levels not to do more. And I think, as you point out, there's going to be a very thorough investigation here.
John, can I have you? I'm only interrupting because you're being so diplomatic, but I really want to understand what you're saying. You said puzzled. I get that. That's a Washington word people use when they need more information. But you also said conscious decision. You're saying based on the available evidence, we'll all have an open mind as we learn, but based on the evidence, you're concerned there was a conscious decision at a high level of the Trump administration, an inside job of sorts, to be less than prepared at the Capitol? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that there had to have been a conscious decision at some level not to do more, not to put in place those physical barricades, not to have sufficient number of personnel, not to have the reinforcement available, as we knew that there were going to be thousands upon thousands of individuals, very emotional individuals, passionate individuals, who were being riled up and incited by Donald Trump descending upon the nation's capital. And no, nothing was done in advance. And so I was Homeland Security Advisor for President Obama for the first 4 years of his term. I was in touch with members of the Congressional Security Staff, the Senate Sergeant at Arms, House Sergeant at Arms, when we had events in Washington to make sure all the preparations were in place. There was clearly a breakdown of communication as well as of leadership. And so I think the intelligence and security and law enforcement professionals would have seen this brewing storm, and they were not directed, they were not allowed to take the appropriate measures that I think any sensible security official would have wanted to have in place to avoid the disaster that we saw.
And as someone who again, used to run and helm the CIA of the United States, you are reminding everyone that if the combined federal and national security apparatus of the United States government did want to secure the Capitol, even against the intensity that we saw, you are saying that is an achievable objective if they decided in advance to fully do it.
Absolutely. There are more than sufficient resources and authorities and capabilities to bring to bear to prevent that debacle from taking place. We see now that the Capitol is being reinforced. It's an impenetrable fortress. Thank goodness. But this is where I think the mobs and individuals are going to be looking at additional targets, those that are soft, those are vulnerable. The Capitol was a soft target on 6 January. It shouldn't have been. There were conscious decisions in my mind that I think were made not to take additional steps. Were they concerned that Donald Trump would react negatively to it? Were they directed to take it easy and not to go, in fact, the way they have done in the past, which is to ensure that all the contingency plans, all the preparations are made? I don't know. But the investigation, I think, is going to reveal some very, very disturbing developments or indications of who actually was complicit in this, who was responsible for it, and then reports about people being walked and toured through the Capitol in advance. Clearly, I think there was surveillance and casing that was done, because the way this crowd just descended upon the Capitol and was able to penetrate, it clearly indicated that they knew that they were not going to be confronted by the overwhelming force that they should have encountered.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.